This presentation, however, exposes the man of sin and the wickedness of the papacy. Now, listen to this. Listen to this quotation. It says, anyone who attempts to construe a personal view of God which conflicts with church dogma must be burned without pity. This is from Pope Innocent III. In 1252, Pope Innocent officially authorized the creation of the horrifying Inquisition torture chambers. This authorization also included perpetual imprisonment or death by fire at the stake. Dressed in black robes with black cowls over their heads, inquisitors could extract confessions from just about anyone. The Inquisition invented every conceivable device to inflict pain by slowly dismembering and dislocating the victim's body. The very act of having a charge brought against you and of being summoned to the Inquisition was sufficient enough to strike terror into the bravest man or woman. Very few individuals who entered the doors of those dungeons of torment emerged whole in mind and body. If they escaped with their lives, they were, with rare exceptions, maimed physically or mentally forever. Those who did happen to endure the torture generally went mad in captivity, screaming out in despair. Others willingly committed suicide during their imprisonment. Entire communities went mad with grief and fear of the thought of being denounced to the Inquisition. This terror spread all over Europe. Men, women, children were all legally murdered by the Roman Church. And during the course of a quick trial, defendants had no right to counsel or advice, and was even denied the right to know the names of their accusers. No favorable evidence or character witnesses were permitted. In any case, anyone who even dared to speak for an accused heretic would be arrested as an accomplice. Suspicion alone of witchcraft would bring torture on any woman. Children whose parents were murdered were forced to beg in vain upon the streets, and no one would dare feed or shelter them for fear of bringing the suspicion of heresy upon themselves. Friend, just a suspicion was sufficient enough to drive away even the closest family and friends, because sympathy for them would be interpreted as sympathy for heretics. Many forms of cruel satanic torture were used by the Roman Church in extracting confession from innocent victims. The pulley, or strappado as it was called, was the first torture method used by the Inquisition. Executioners would hoist the victim up to the ceiling using a rope with their hands tied securely behind their back. They were then suspended about 6 feet from the floor. And in this position, heavy iron weights, usually amounting to about 45 kilograms, were attached to their feet. The executioners would then pull on the rope, then suddenly allowing it to slack, causing the victim to fall. The rapid descent would then come to an abrupt stop, jerking every joint and nerve in the body. In most cases, it caused painful dislocation. This process was repeated again and again, heavier and heavier, more intense, until the victim was forced to confess or become unconscious. The monks would calmly stand by to record any and every confession. Now, there are recorded transcripts today which reveal the satanic horrors of the dungeons. The Spanish Inquisition was considered the most deadliest and notorious of all inquisitions. It was the highly organized, efficient in its deadliness. The first two inquisitors in the districts of Seville were appointed in 1480 by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, King and Queen of Spain. Yes, it was this same Ferdinand and Isabella who gave consent for Christopher Columbus to set sail and discover America. Ferdinand and Queen Isabella gave orders to round up the most wealthiest heretics. Now, the reason for this was the property of those accused were shared equally between the Pope and the Dominicans. And then from the mid-14th century to the end of the 18th century, torture was a common and sanctioned part of the legal proceedings of most European countries. They were approved by the Inquisition in cases of heresy. Friend, the most common means of torture included burning, beating, and suffocating. The rack was a popular means of extricating confession. The victim was tied across a board by their ankles and wrists. Rollers at either end of the board were turned by pulling the body in opposite directions until dislocation of every joint occurred. Other forms of torture included a prisoner being fastened in a groove upon a table on his or her back. Suspended above was a gigantic pendulum, the ball of which had a sharp edge on the lower section of it, and the pendulums lengthened with every stroke. See, the victim sees this engine of destruction swinging back and forth only a short distance from his eyes. Momentarily, the sharp edge comes nearer and then cuts the skin, and then gradually cuts deeper and deeper until the individual dies. With their feet in the stocks, two pieces of timber clamped together over and under, both across each of the victim's leg above the ankles, and this is known as the stocks form of torture. The soles of their feet, then having been greased with lard, a blazing brazier was applied to them, and they were first blistered and then fried. With the water torture, the victim's nostrils were pinched shut, and 8 quarts of fluid were poured down the victim's throat through a funnel. Other techniques included forcing a cloth down the throat while pouring water, which made a swallowing reflex, pushing it further down into the stomach, producing all the agonies of suffocation by drowning until the victim lost consciousness. A vivid description of these types of cruelty should give you an idea of the horrors to which people were subjected by the hands of the Roman Church.